The prairie outside Willow Bend had a way of making promises feel permanent. The land stretched wide and unbroken, grass bending like water under the wind, the sky so large it seemed to listen. Eleanor had always believed that if words were spoken out, there far from walls and witnesses they carried more weight than those said anywhere else. That was where Mason asked her to marry him. They were still young then, though at 19 Eleanor already felt older than her years. Life had pressed itself into her early, the way hard weather presses into wood. Mason was 30, broad-shouldered and quiet, with hands roughened by farm work, and eyes that softened only when they rested on her. He took off his hat before he spoke, as if the prairie itself deserved respect. He didn't have a ring. Instead, he took a thin piece of twine from his pocket and tied it loosely around her finger, smiling like a boy who knew he had nothing to offer but hope. "One day," he said, "when I can do it right." Eleanor laughed then, a light, hopeful sound. She said yes, without thinking. They stood together in the tall grass and spoke words they did not fully understand about a small house, a porch that caught the evening breeze, children running barefoot through dust and sunlight. Mason promised to work harder. Eleanor promised to wait. They sealed it with a kiss that tasted of wind and summer. They called it an engagement, though it was nothing the law or church would recognize. It was only a vow between two people too young to know how quickly the world could take such things away. By autumn, the ground had gone hard. Eleanor's father had always farmed thin land. Even in good years it barely fed them. But the last 2 seasons had been cruel. Rain came late or not at all. Crops failed. The small savings her mother kept in a tin beneath the bed vanished one doctor's visit at a time. When the winter wind started creeping through the cracks in the walls, Eleanor understood something her parents had been avoiding. There wasn't enough. They didn't say it all at once. It came in fragments. Her mother, lingering too long at the table after supper. Her father, counting and recounting coins that never seemed to grow. One night, as Eleanor mended a tear in her only good dress, her mother finally spoke. "You're grown now," she said, not unkindly. "Too grown to be sleeping under our roof when we can't promise meals." Eleanor looked up, needles still between her fingers. "There's a man," her father said, clearing his throat. "A rancher." She knew the name before he said it. Everyone did. Nicholas. He owned the sheep ranch east of the river, land passed down from his Apache parents. Land he had expanded through skill and patience, buying grazing rights, surviving droughts that ruined lesser men. People said he could read the weather better than the sky itself. They also said he was twice divorced, that his wives had left with pockets full and hearts empty. They said he was difficult. They said he was dangerous. "He needs a wife," her mother added softly, "to keep house, to care for his boy." The words settled heavy in Eleanor's chest. She thought of Mason off the twine ring, of laughter carried on the wind. Mason had no land to offer, no savings, no promise beyond his willingness to work. He could barely keep his own parents fed. Eleanor knew this. Her parents knew it too. "Love doesn't fill a pantry," her father said, his voice rough with shame. Eleanor did not cry that night. She lay awake listening to the wind scrape against the boards, counting the spaces between her breaths. By morning, the choice had already been made for her. The wedding was set quickly, before she could change her mind or gather courage enough to run. It was held at the Apache church, a simple structure of timber and stone, standing apart from the white churches closer to town. Eleanor had never been inside before. The air smelled of wood smoke and old prayers. She wore a borrowed dress, too tight across the shoulders, too loose at the waist. Her hands trembled as she clasped them together, knuckles white. When she looked up, Nicholas was already there. He was younger than she expected, 30 perhaps. Tall and broad, with a solid build earned through labor rather than excess. His face was strong, clean-shaven, his dark hair neatly kept. He wore fine clothes, well-made, but not showy, a man accustomed to quality, without needing to prove it. His eyes were calm, observant, and when they met hers, he did not look away. Eleanor felt something twist in her chest. Not fear exactly, but uncertainty. This was not the monster she had imagined. Mason stood among the guests, hat clutched in his hands. Their eyes met once, just once. That was enough. The minister spoke. Words about duty, about union, about God's will. Eleanor heard them as if from a distance. When it was her turn to speak, her voice came thin, but steady. I do. Nicholas did not mirror the words. I will, he said instead. A murmur passed through the room. Eleanor glanced at him, startled, but his gaze remained forward. He made no grand promises, no talk of love or destiny. Only that simple statement, spoken like a vow made to himself. Before the minister could continue, Nicholas reached into his coat and drew out a small object wrapped in cloth. He placed it in Eleanor's hands. It was a silver piece, worked by Apache hands, etched with a pattern she did not recognize. It felt warm, as if it had been carried close to his body for some time. For protection, he said quietly. And respect. The church fell silent. Eleanor closed her fingers around the silver. In that moment, something shifted, not trust, not yet, but the beginning of doubt about everything she thought she knew. When the ceremony ended, she turned to Mason. Her words came out barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, she said. Please, forgive me. He nodded once. He did not follow her as she walked away. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods. Nicholas waited beside the wagon, holding the reins. He helped her up with careful hands, never lingering longer than necessary. As the ranch disappeared into the distance behind them, Eleanor looked back only once. The prairie did not answer. And just like that, the promise made too young was left behind, carried away by the wind. The road to Nicholas's ranch followed the river for nearly 10 miles, winding through low cottonwoods and open stretches of pale grass. Eleanor sat stiffly in the wagon, her gloved hand folded in her lap, the silver token hidden beneath the fabric of her dress. She had not spoken since they left the church. Nicholas did not press her. He handled the reins with ease, guiding the team as if they were part of him. When the wagon struck a rut, he slowed without comment. Once, when the wind picked up and dust blew into her eyes, he handed her his handkerchief without looking her way. You'll want this, he said. That was all. By the time the ranch came into view, the sun was low and red, hovering near the horizon. Eleanor had heard people call it large, but words had not prepared her for the sight. The land spread wide on both sides of the river, fenced and marked, dotted with grazing sheep that moved like pale clouds across the earth. The main house stood solid and well kept, built of timber and stone, its roof straight, its windows clean. This was my parents' land, Nicholas said, as if answering a question she had not asked. It was smaller then. Eleanor nodded, unsure what to say. He brought the wagon to a stop near the portage and helped her down. His hand was firm, respectful. She noticed that even here, on his own land, he did not hurry her, did not claim her space. Inside, the house was quiet. Not empty, just settled. The floors were scrubbed, the furniture sturdy and well-made. A fire burned low in the hearth, though the evening was mild. Eleanor saw no signs of excess, only care. You'll have your own room, Nicholas said, leading her down the hall. The door locks from the inside. He opened it and stepped aside. The room was simple but faint. A bed with a hand-stitched quilt, a washstand, a small window facing east, toward the river. Eleanor noticed the lock at once, solid iron, newly oiled. I won't enter unless you ask, Nicholas said, and I won't expect anything you don't give freely. She turned to him, startled. That includes... He paused, choosing his words. That includes being my wife in any way beyond name. Eleanor swallowed. She had prepared herself for many things, but not this. Thank you, she said, though the word felt too small. He nodded once and left her alone. Down the hall, Eleanor heard voice, slow, familiar with the space. Someone laughed, then coughed. Curious, she stepped to the doorway and looked out. A small boy sat at the kitchen table, his feet not quite reaching the floor. He was thin, his dark hair too long, his shoulders narrow beneath an oversized shirt. A woman, one of the house staff, set a bowl before him. He barely touched it. That's Thomas, Nicholas said quietly behind her. My son. His mother left 2 years ago. Eleanor turned. Nicholas's face gave nothing away, but his eyes had gone distant. He doesn't eat much, Nicholas added. The doctor says he's healthy enough. Just quiet. Something in Eleanor's chest softened. That night, Eleanor could not sleep. The house creaked the way all houses did, settling into the dark. Somewhere down the hall, she heard Nicholas's footsteps, slow and measured, making his rounds before retiring. He did not come near her door. In the morning, she rose early, habit pulling her from bed. She dressed quietly and followed the smell of coffee to the kitchen. Nicholas sat at the table, hat beside him, a ledger open before him. He looked up, surprised. You didn't need to get up, he said. The staff. I know, Eleanor replied. But I wanted to. She hesitated, then reached for a pan. I can cook. He watched her for a moment, then closed the ledger. No one's asked you to, he said carefully. I'm asking myself. That seemed to satisfy him. She cooked simply eggs, bread warmed on the stove, a bit of salt pork. She watched Thomas from the corner of her eye. He picked at his food at first, wary, but when Eleanor smiled at him and set a small portion before him without comment, he ate. Not much, but more than before. Nicholas noticed. Days passed quietly. Eleanor learned the rhythms of the ranch. The early mornings, the sound of sheep moving through the grass. The way Nicholas spoke to his workers with calm authority. He had earned their respect. She saw that now. They listened because he listened first. She found herself wanting to help. She mended queues, swept floors, learned which foods Nicholas avoided and which he tolerated. He never complained, but she saw the way his shoulders relaxed when a meal suited him. One evening, she found Thomas sitting alone by the fire, a book open in his lap. He looked up when she entered, his eyes wary but curious. Do you like stories? She asked. He nodded. She sat beside him not too close and began to read. Her voice felt strange at first, carrying into the quiet room. But Thomas leaned in, his breathing evening out as the story unfolded. When she finished, he looked up at her. Will you read again tomorrow? He asked. Yes, she said without thinking. Nicholas watched from the doorway. He said nothing. That night, Eleanor wrote a letter. She did not sign it. She did not address it. She wrote only what pressed hardest on her heart, memories of the prairie, of a promise made too young, of the ache that came with leaving without closure. When she finished, she folded the paper and tucked it into her bag. She did not send it. Outside, the sheep settled. The river moved steadily on, and the house, built by patience and held together by quiet choices, stood firm against the night. Eleanor lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the silver token warm against her skin. For the first time since the wedding, she wondered, not with fear, but with uncertainty, what kind of life she had stepped into. Winter came early that year, not with snow at first, but with a brittle cold that crept in at night and lingered through the mornings. Eleanor learned the sound of it, the way the boards in the house sighed before dawn, the way the sheep shifted closer together in the corrals, their breath lifting like smoke. She also learned Nicholas's habits. He rose before the sun, moving through the house with a quiet certainty. Boots laced, coat buttoned, coffee taken strong and black. He spoke little in the mornings, not from coldness, but from a kind of respect for the day ahead. Eleanor came to understand that his silence was not emptiness. It was space. As weeks passed, that space filled. She learned how the ranch ran, not by being told, but by watching. Nicholas had inherited the land from his parents, but little else had come easily. The flocks had once been small, vulnerable to drought and sickness. He had learned to rotate grazing, to watch the river level, to bargain fairly with traders hauling wool east. When storms came, he planned ahead. When losses happened, he did not rage. He adjusted. "This land will give back," he told her one afternoon, as they stood watching the sheep along the far fence line, nearly half a mile out. "But only if you listen to it." Eleanor nodded. She had never thought of land that way. She found herself wanting to be useful, not out of obligation, but because stillness made her restless. Nicholas never asked it of her, but he did not stop her either. When she offered to help sort wool, he showed her how, without touching her hands. When she asked about the accounts, he explained them plainly, without condescension. At night, after Thomas had gone to bed, Eleanor sometimes sat at the small desk in her room and wrote. The letters were always addressed the same way, though she never wrote the name at the top. She wrote about the ranch, about the quiet, about a man who did not raise his voice, and a child who slept better now. She wrote about missing something she could not fully name. When she finished, she folded the pages and hid them away. She told herself it was harmless. Words without witnesses. Thomas changed slowly, like the season. He began to eat more, still cautious, still small, but no longer fading. He followed Eleanor through the house, carrying his book, asking questions. One night, when a storm rattled the windows and thunder rolled across the hills, he crept into the parlor where Eleanor sat mending. "Can I stay?" he asked. She opened her arms without thinking. Nicholas found them like that later, Thomas asleep against Eleanor's shoulder, her hand resting gently on his back. Nicholas stopped short in the doorway, something tightening in his chest. He did not speak. He simply stood there, watching, committing the moment to memory. That night, after Eleanor had put Thomas to bed, Nicholas waited in the kitchen. "You don't have to do this," he said when she entered. "For him. Or for me." Eleanor met his gaze. "I know." Their eyes held for a moment longer than before. Not a challenge, not a promise, just recognition. As winter deepened, talk of the past began to surface not in grand confessions, but in fragments. Eleanor learned that Nicholas's first wife had left when Thomas was still small, overwhelmed by the isolation. The second had wanted town life, parties, a kind of attention Nicholas could not give. "They weren't wrong," he said once, matter of fact. "They just wanted something else." "And you?" Eleanor asked. Nicholas considered. "I wanted peace." She did not tell him then what she wanted. She was not sure yet. The letters grew heavier in her bag. One afternoon, Nicholas returned early, his coat dusted with dirt, his expression tight. Eleanor sensed the shift before he spoke. "Who is Mason?" he asked. The name landed between them like a dropped plate. Eleanor froze. "How do you—" "I found the letters," he said, "by accident." It was not the truth, but it was close enough to hurt. Collins had stretched. Eleanor felt heat rise to her face. Not guilt, but something sharper. A sense of being exposed. "They were never sent," she said. "But they were written." "Yes." Nicholas's jaw tightened. Why? Eleanor struggled for the right words. Because some goodbyes don't happen all at once. Because I didn't choose this. He looked away then, pain flickering across his face before he could hide it. I've treated you well, he said quietly. I know. And still. I didn't say I wanted to leave, she said, her voice rising despite herself. I said I needed to remember who I was before everything changed. Nicholas turned back to her, anger and hurt tangled together. In emotion he would later regret. He gathered the letters from the toll, crumpling them in his hands. You can't live in two worlds, he said. Not here. He threw the papers into the stove. The flames took them quickly. Eleanor stared, something breaking open in her chest. Those were mine, she said. You had no right. Regret flashed across Nicholas's face, but pride kept him silent. Eleanor did not wait. She pulled on her coat and ran. The night was cold, the road hard beneath her boots. She did not hear the wagon until it was too late. The impact came sudden and bright, the world tilting sideways. Then nothing. When Eleanor woke, the world was quiet. She lay in a bed that felt unfamiliar. The ceiling blurred. Her head ached. She turned slightly and felt a hand tighten around hers. Nicholas sat beside her, unshaven, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. He had not left. You're safe, he said hoarsely. You're home. She looked at him, searching her memory, and found only fog. Who are you? She asked. The question cut deeper than any anger. Nicholas swallowed hard. I'm Nicholas, he said. Your husband. Outside, the winter wind pressed against the walls. Inside, the quiet took on a new weight, one filled not with loss, but with the fragile possibility of the beginning again. Eleanor slept for 3 days. Nicholas did not leave her side. The doctor from town came once each morning, his boots tracking dust into the room, his voice low and careful. He said the wagon had struck her hard enough to throw her several feet. No broken bones, no bleeding on the brain that he could see. A miracle, considering. But when Eleanor opened her eyes and looked at Nicholas as if he were a stranger, the doctor only sighed. Sometimes the mind protects itself, he said. She may remember. She may not. Best thing you can do is keep her calm. Nicholas nodded, though his hands shook when the man left. The house grew quieter than it had ever been. Even the sheep seemed to move more softly, as if the land itself knew something fragile was trying to heal. Thomas was kept away at first, watching from the hall with worried eyes. He asked again and again if Eleanor would wake up. Yes, Nicholas told him. She will. When Eleanor finally stirred, it was late afternoon. The light slanted in through the east window, pale and cold. Nicholas was half asleep in the chair beside the bed, his head bowed, one hand wrapped around hers. She felt the warmth first, then the weight. Her fingers moved slightly. Nicholas startled awake at once. Eleanor, he said, his voice rough. Can you hear me? She blinked, the room swimming into focus. The man beside her looked worn, his dark hair unflined, his eyes red and rimmed with shadow. He was holding her hand as if afraid to let go. Her throat was dry. I don't know where I am. You're home, he said gently. You were hurt. You're safe. She studied his face, searching for something familiar. There was none. No fear either. Just confusion. Who are you? She asked again. Nicholas swallowed. My name is Nicholas. I'm your husband. She frowned, not in disbelief, but in surprise. I don't remember getting married. I know, he said. She tried to sit up, then winced as pain flared behind her eyes. Nicholas steadied her at once, careful not to press too hard. Easy, he said. You took a bad fall. Why are you here? She asked softly. Nicholas hesitated. The truth pressed hard against his chest. He could tell her everything, the letters, the argument, the way his anger had driven her into the night. But the doctor's words echoed in his mind. Keep her calm. Because this is where you belong, he said instead. The days that followed blurred together. Eleanor slept often, waking in short stretches, her mind a blank page. Nicholas remained near, bringing water, speaking when she asked questions, silent when she did not. He never corrected her if she called him by his name instead of anything else. He never touched her beyond what was necessary. When she was strong enough, he helped her sit by the window. She watched the sheep move slowly across the pasture, their bells faint in the distance. It's peaceful, she said. It is, Nicholas agreed. Thomas hovered in the doorway until Nicholas beckoned him closer. This is Thomas, Nicholas said. My son. Eleanor smiled at the boy. Hello, Thomas. Thomas stared at her, his lip trembling. You don't remember me, he said. She shook her head gently. I'm sorry. He burst into tears. Eleanor reached for him without thinking, pulling him close. It's all right, she murmured. I don't remember a lot of things. Maybe you can help me. Thomas sniffed and nodded, pressing his face into her shoulder. Nicholas turned away, blinking hard. As Eleanor regained strength, Nicholas took on every task himself. He rose earlier, worked later, cooked meals that were simple but nourishing. When Eleanor grew restless, he brought her small comforts, a book, a bit of embroidery thread, a chair by the fire. You don't have to do all this, she said once. Yes, he replied quietly. I do. He watched her relearn the world, watched her discover Thomas again, this time without expectation or obligation. She laughed more easily now, unburdened by memory. When Thomas asked her to read, she did so gladly, her voice steady, her presence warm. One evening, as the fire burned low, Eleanor looked at Nicholas thoughtfully. You're very kind to me, she said. I don't know why. Nicholas felt the weight of every unspoken regret settle on his shoulders. Because you deserve it. Weeks passed. Snow fell at last, softening the land. Eleanor walked slowly at first, leaning on Nicholas's arm, then on her own. She asked questions about the ranch, about the land, about him. Why do you live so far from town? She asked one morning as they watched the sheep. Because here things are honest, he said. The land doesn't lie. She smiled at that. And somewhere along the way, she began to look at him differently. Not with obligation, not with fear, but with trust. Nicholas noticed the change and feared it all the same. He knew memory could return at any time, sudden and unforgiving. He braced himself for the day she would look at him and remember the letters, the fire, the anger. The day came without warning. Eleanor sat at the small desk in her room, turning a piece of silver over in her hand, the token Nicholas had given her at the wedding. Her head throbbed suddenly, images flashing bright and sharp. A prairie, a promise, a name spoken with love. Mason? She gasped, clutching the desk. When Nicholas rushed in, she looked up at him, tears in her eyes. I remember, she said. He froze. I remember everything, she continued. The wedding, the letters, the fight. Nicholas felt his heart sink. I'm sorry, he said at once, for all of it. I was wrong. Eleanor stood slowly, crossing the space between them. She searched his face, not with anger, but with something steadier. I loved someone once, she said. But that love belonged to who I was then. And now? Nicholas asked quietly. She reached for his hands, holding them firmly. Now I know who I chose to be. And I choose you. The words settled gently, without drama or fire. Just truth. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering old tracks, smoothing the land into something new. Inside, the house built by patience, and held together by quiet choices, Nicholas closed his eyes, breathing in the moment. For the first time, he believed not in fate, not in obligation, but in the slow, honest work of love. Spring came slowly to the high desert, as if the land itself were cautious about hope. Snowmelt swelled the river, running cold and fast for a few weeks before settling back into its familiar channel. The sheep shed their heavy winter coats, tufts of wool catching on fence posts and low brush. New grass pushed through the soil in stubborn patches of green. Eleanor marked the change by the way the light entered the house. Mornings came earlier now, brighter. She stood at the window one dawn, watching Nicholas walk the yard with Thomas at his side, the boy keeping pace with quick, determined steps. They stopped near the fence line, Nicholas pointing out something in the distance, Thomas listening with the seriousness of someone who knew he was being trusted. She felt a quiet fullness in her chest. Life did not become suddenly easy after she chose Nicholas, but it did become honest. They spoke more now, about the ranch, about Thomas, about the past in measured pieces that did not reopen wounds, but acknowledged their shape. Nicholas never defended his anger the night of the letters. Eleanor never excused the secrecy that had hurt him. They carried those truths together, not as weapons, but as lessons. One afternoon, nearly 2 months after Eleanor regained her memory, a rider appeared at the edge of the property. Eleanor saw him first, dust rising behind the horse. Nicholas followed her gaze. He knew before the man reached the gate. Mason dismounted slowly, hat in hand, his posture familiar and strangely distant all at once. Time had not been unkind to him, but it had changed him. There was steadiness there now, and something resolved. "I won't stay long," Mason said after Nicholas invited him onto the porch. "I just came to deliver this." He handed Eleanor a folded card. She recognized his handwriting immediately. "It's an invitation," Mason continued, his voice calm. "I'm getting married. Next Sunday. At the Methodist church in town." Eleanor felt the moment, settle not with pain but with clarity. "I'm glad," she said, and meant it. Mason looked at her closely, searching her face, then nodded. "So am I." He turned to Nicholas then, meeting his eyes squarely. "You take care of her." Nicholas inclined his head. "I do." When Mason left, Eleanor stood on the porch long after the dust had settled. Nicholas joined her, not touching, simply standing near. "I don't know if we should go," she said quietly. "You don't owe him anything," Nicholas replied. "I know," she said, "but I think I need to see it, to finish something." Nicholas considered, then nodded. "Then we'll go." The town watched them arrive the following Sunday. Some faces held curiosity, others judgment softened by time. Eleanor felt the old weight of those looks, but found it no longer bent her spine. Nicholas walked beside her, steady, not shielding her, not pushing her forward, just present. Mason stood at the altar with a woman Eleanor did not know. The bride was kind-faced, her smile easy, her hand resting comfortably in Mason's. Eleanor felt a surprising sense of relief. When their eyes met, Mason smiled, a small, genuine thing, and Eleanor returned it. Whatever had once been theirs belonged firmly to the past. After the ceremony, Mason approached them. "I'm glad you came," he said. "So am I," Eleanor replied. They did not linger. There was nothing left to say. That night, back at the ranch, Eleanor sat at the small table in the kitchen, hands folded around a cup of tea she had not touched. "I think I'm ready," she said. Nicholas looked up from his work. "For what?" "To belong here, fully." He did not answer at once. When he did, his voice was careful. "You already do." She shook her head gently, not just in name, in choice. He reached across the table then, taking her hands. This time she did not pull away. Summer followed, steady and warm. Eleanor found herself more at ease in her body. more certain of her place. One morning, when the nausea came hard and sudden, she sat on the edge of the bed, a realization dawning. Nicholas listened as she spoke, his face unreadable until the words settled. "You're sure?" he asked. She nodded. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he reached for her, resting his forehead against hers. "We'll do this right," he said. They told Thomas together. The boy stared at Eleanor's belly, as if it were a miracle unfolding before his eyes. "A baby?" he asked. "Yes," Eleanor said. He grinned, wide and unguarded. "I'll help." By the time autumn returned, the ranch felt fuller than ever. Not louder, not busier, just whole. Eleanor stood one evening at the fence line, watching the sheep drift homeward under a ski streaked with orange and purple. Nicholas joined her, slipping his coat over her shoulders against the cooling air. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Staying?" She considered the question, the land before her, the house behind her, the life between. "No," she said, "because I didn't stay. I arrived." Nicholas smiled then, a rare, unguarded expression. And as the light faded and the stars began to show, the choice they had made, slowly, painfully, honestly settled into the land like something meant to last. The baby was born just before dawn, when the desert still held the night in its breath. Rain had fallen the evening before, rare, steady, soaking the ground instead of running off it. The river swelled slightly, no more than a foot at its widest point, but enough to darken the banks and soften the dust. Nicholas stood outside the house for a long moment, boots planted on the porch, listening to the quiet rush of water and the low murmur of voices inside. When the midwife opened the door and nodded, he felt something inside him loosen, that he had not known was held so tight. "She's strong," the woman said. "Both of them." Nicholas stepped into the bedroom, as if entering sacred ground. Eleanor lay propped against pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale but peaceful. In her arms was a small red-faced bundle, wrapped in a clean blanket. The baby's fists opened and closed with slow determination, as if already reaching for the world. Nicholas stopped a few feet from the bed, unsure where to stand. "She has your eyes," Eleanor said softly. He moved closer then, carefully, as though sudden motion might break something fragile. He looked down at the child, his daughter, and felt the weight of generations settle into his chest. Apache blood and white blood, land and river, past and future, all carried in something no bigger than his forearm. "What's her name?" he asked. Eleanor smiled. "Sarah." Nicholas nodded once. "A good name." Thomas hovered near the doorway, twisting his hands together. Nicholas waved him in. "Come meet your sister," he said. Thomas approached slowly, awe written across his face. Eleanor shifted the baby just enough so he could see. "She's small," Thomas whispered. "She won't always be," Eleanor said. Thomas straightened, pride swelling his narrow shoulders. "I'll watch over her." Nicholas rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "I know you will." In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. Nights came broken and bright with lamplight. Eleanor learned the sound of her daughter's cries, the way one learns weather quickly, instinctively. Nicholas slept little, but he did not complain. He took Thomas out earlier in the mornings, taught him to check fence lines, to count sheep without rushing. The ranch continued to run as it always had, but it felt different now. Not larger, deeper. Word of the baby traveled faster than Eleanor expected. Some visitors came with kindness, others with curiosity, thinly veiled as concern. Nicholas met them all the same way, calm, polite, unyielding. He did not argue. He did not explain. The life he was building no longer required defense. One afternoon, Eleanor sat beneath the cottonwoods with Fra asleep against her chest. Thomas lay nearby, reading aloud in a halting but determined voice. Nicholas watched from the fence, his gaze steady, his posture relaxed in a way it had never been before. Later, as the sun dropped toward the hills, Eleanor joined him. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked. Nicholas shook his head. "I used to. Thought peace was something you found by walking away. And now I know it's something you build and keep." Eleanor leaned into him, feeling the soft warmth of his presence. "I'm glad I stayed," she said. Nicholas did not answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet. "So am I." That autumn, they rode into town together for the first time as a family. Eleanor carried Sarah close, wrapped against the cool air. Thomas rode beside Nicholas, sitting tall in the saddle. The town watched them pass, some with surprise, some with softened judgment, some with nothing at all. It no longer mattered. They attended the harvest gathering without incident. Eleanor spoke with women who once would not meet her eyes. Nicholas discussed wool prices and grazing rights with men who had once spoken of him only in rumor. No one apologized. No one needed to. As winter approached, Eleanor planted apple saplings along the southern fence line, each one spaced 12 feet apart. Nicholas watched, amused. "They won't bear fruit for years," he said. "That's all right," Eleanor replied, pressing soil down around the roots. "We're not in a hurry." The first snow came light and clean. Sarah slept through it, warm in Eleanor's arms. Thomas ran outside to catch flakes on his tongue, laughing. Nicholas stood at the doorway, taking it all in. The sound, the sight, the shape of a life that felt earned. One evening, after the children were asleep, Eleanor and Nicholas sat by the fire. "Do you ever miss who you were before?" Eleanor asked. Nicholas considered the question. "I remember him," he said, "but I don't miss him." Eleanor nodded. "Me neither." The fire burned low, the house settling around them. Outside, the sheep shifted and quieted, the land holding fast. They did not speak of forever. They did not need to. What they had was not built on vows spoken too young or promises made without understanding. It was built on patience, on error and forgiveness, on the courage to choose again when it would have been easier not to. And when the wind moved through the cottonwoods and the river carried on its steady course, the life they had chosen stayed with them, with the land, and with the generations yet to come. This story was never about fate or obligation, but about the quiet strength of choosing to stay, to forgive, and to build a life with patience and heart. If this journey moved you, please press subscribe, like, share, and leave a comment, so I can continue creating even more meaningful stories for you. Thank you all for listening.